Hello, welcome to another screencast where this time we'll be talking about connective tissue. This is sort of a general introduction and overview of connective tissue, and there's a lot of things to describe and explain here, but we are primarily going to look at sort of first the varied functions of connective tissue. We'll compare it to epithelium, and then some of the characteristics of the connective tissue, some varieties of connective tissue. We're going to talk a little bit, actually a lot about this extracellular matrix here, which includes these fibers, right, and the ground substance. And we probably won't get to this vascularization stuff, but here we go. So connective tissue is the most broadly and abundant, widely distributed, most functionally varied tissue in the entire body. So you have lots of different examples here in this image. Pardon me. So first and foremost, we have things like these fibrous connective tissues, these loose connective tissues, and then bone, right? So these are playing roles in support and protection, right? So there are these supporting protection roles that connective tissue plays, as well as just literally connecting things together, right? So for example, you have tendons here that are connecting muscle to the bone, right? So they're literally connecting two things together there. This loose connective tissue is the lamina propria, is that basement membrane, right? So this is the underlying connective tissue that we've been drawing earlier. And not only are they supportive, protective, and actually connecting, but they also play roles in transport, right? So blood is a type of connective tissue. And you can think of the term connective here, like blood is connected to every other cell sort of in the body. Every cell in the body has got to be in contact with blood or very close proximity to blood. So blood is connecting, is the connector for all the other cells and tissues in the body. And it is the only liquid or fluid connective tissue that's there. So you have not only blood, but when we talk about blood, we will also talk about lymph as an extension of that blood, and this is where you have these white blood cells are going to migrate between the blood and the lymph. So this lymph can also be considered a fluid connective tissue and involved with transporting. You have the adipose cells down here, and these are for energy storage. Right? Now this kind of comes out of left field a little bit to most kids. Like, wait a minute, what's this have to do with connecting anything together? Well, you see fat in a lot of places that all throughout the body. So here they're showing you fat connected to the skin, right? And so the skin subcutaneous, right, just below the skin is where fat is stored, and so those fat cells are actually anchored to one another and will also sort of be playing a connective role there. So this energy storage, the fat molecules there, the fat droplets inside of those cells. And then lastly, we talked about these white blood cells. There is some sort of protective functioning there that we mentioned over here, like the bone is protective of organs, but this protection is more of an immune protection, right? So immune system protection from pathogens, bacteria, viruses, fungal spores, that sort of thing. So we have these white blood cells that are playing a role in that. Right? So quite a bit of different types of roles that connective tissue are playing there. So here's a little graphic organizer to sort of help begin to classify this and help this make sense a little bit. So we have these connective tissue proper, we have these fluid connective tissues, and then these supporting connective tissues. So the connective tissue proper is in two flavors. We have a loose and a dense, right? And we're going to talk about these in just a little bit more. And then we mentioned the fluid ones, the blood and the lymph. And then these supporting the cartilage, and underneath the cartilage there there are 3 flavors of cartilage that we'll see under there as well. So all told, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then there's a couple of subclasses of these, right? So there's about 9 or 10 different connective tissue examples or samples here that is going to be covered a little bit later in the chapter. So just a quick comparison here between epithelial and connective. So when we were looking at epithelial tissue and trying to classify it, we were looking at the cells, right? And to tell us, not only the shape of the cells, right, the layers of the cells, numbers of those cells, right? So in epithelium, the cells were, and I'll just draw some simple columnar cells here, right? These cells are anchored together very tightly, right? And they are attached to this basement membrane as lamina propria, this apical surface up here. And so we're looking at identifying this as a simple columnar because it's one cell layer, right? And it's only, then these cells are columnar. We're going to contrast that with when we try to identify different connective tissues. We don't want to look at the cell. We want to primarily look at the ECM, or the extracellular matrix. Okay? So this extracellular matrix is the stuff around the outside of the cell, around the cell. Okay? So we'll see that there definitely are cells in connective tissue, right? So here would be the cell, and here's the cell. But the cells are very spread out. They are not connected directly together to one another. There's no sort of basement membrane or anything like that. And what we want to look at is the extracellular matrix. So the extracellular matrix will be all of this environment that is around. That didn't change color. There we go. All this environment that's around these cells, and the environment is going to look different. It's going to have different components to it, but this is the extracellular matrix here. So I'm going to look here to categorize or classify the different types of connective tissues. Now, they are still tissues, and so there are some similarities between epithelium and connective tissue. Right? First and foremost is that there are cells there. I'm not saying that there aren't any cells and we shouldn't be looking at them or concerned with them, because they play different roles, right? And they are important. And those cells, we just don't look at those cells to tell us which type of connective tissue it is. And then it's important to understand that those cells, though, have an interrelated function. Interrelated functions. So let's just take a quick look here at this little jobby here. So let's take a look at connective tissue. Right? So when we look at connective tissue proper here, there's going to be a cellular component and there's going to be an extracellular matrix component. Let's talk about the cells first, and then we'll focus really on the extracellular matrix. So the cells of the connective tissue come in a few different types. One of the foremost types are fibroblasts. We also then have macrophages. There are mast cells. There are lymphocytes. And then there are adipocytes. All right, so break these down a little bit. Fibroblasts, right? This are the fibers, and then the blast means that they are producing or making, right? So these fibroblasts will give rise to fibrocyte, or a fiber-producing cell. So this is a mature cell that has produced the fibers, and the fibers are going to be in that extracellular matrix. These macrophages, mast cells, and lymphocytes, these are all types of white blood cells. These are all immune system cells. And they are playing roles in protection, and we'll talk about those a little bit more detail later. These adipocytes here, these are, again, fat storage, right? So adipose is fat. So these are the different cells. The ones that we focus a lot on are the fibroblasts because they are producing these fibers of that extracellular matrix. So now let's come down here and look at this extracellular matrix. The extracellular matrix is a suspension. Right? And the best way I have to kind of describe this or think about this is if you think of like pulpy orange juice. Right? So here's the orange juice, and then you have those little bits of pulp and fiber and things that are suspended in there. No matter how much you shake that orange juice up, it's not going to, those fibers are not going to dissolve in that orange juice, right? So that is that's the sort of the best way to think about a suspension, or a good way to think about a suspension, I think. So pulpy orange juice. Now, where the pulp is going to be a fiber, and the juice part is going to be what's known as the ground substance. Oops, sorry. The ground substance. So this extracellular matrix is a suspension, and it's made of two things, right? It is made of the ground substance, and it's made of fibers. Okay. So this ground substance, depending on its makeup, is either really watery, it can be gelatinous or rubbery, or it can be hard and mineralized. Okay? So again, the ground substance is like the juice of the pulpy orange juice, and it can either be watery, gelatinous, or rubbery, or they're hard and mineralized. The fibers then that are suspended in that ground substance, the primary type are collagen fibers, and this is a protein, collagen. And then elastin is another type of fiber. And then lastly, reticular. So reticular fibers. So these fibers, right, the collagen, the elastin, and the reticular fibers look a little different. The collagen are really thick, dark fibers. The elastin are thinner. And then the reticulum means a network, right? So these reticular ones are thin, but they are irregularly shaped and will kind of interlock, right? So each of these is a little reticular fiber. It's all bent and can form a mesh or a network, right? So collagen are thick proteins, the elastin are thinner ones, and then the reticular are kind of bent. And again, they're going to be suspended in the ground substance. Right? So I can't emphasize this enough to sort of understand here that the extracellular matrix, right, is made up of this ground substance and these fibers, right? And then this extracellular matrix is really what we're going to look at to begin to classify the different types of connective tissue, right? Here's a cartoon of that, and I think I'm going to stop here for now, and we'll pick up a little bit later.